Okay, good afternoon. It's 2:55. So in the next 15 minutes or so, we'll talk about the pharmacology of the drugs that are being used mainly for antidepressant. So these are the learning objectives. So we'll reiterate some of the cellular and molecular mechanisms of etiology, but we'll focus on the key mechanisms that are useful for the drugs that you'll be learning. And then we'll talk about the specific mechanisms of actions of all these 6 different classes of drugs that Dr. Emmett already mentioned. And then within these 6 classes, one of which, serotonin, norepinephrine reuptake inhibitors, are further subdivided into the earlier version, the tricyclic antidepressants, as well as the newer generation SNRIs. And then we'll talk about them. And because there are a lot of drugs and that cannot be discussed within 15 minutes, so for most of them, I will just present the general pharmacology of them and what to watch for, and then maybe mention 1 or 2 drugs. But we'll spend more time on the selective serotonin reuptake inhibitors because these drugs are really the first line treatment for depression. And then, so the last one, we'll just talk about a few of the specific drugs. So as Dr. Cohen had mentioned very nicely with an extensive review of some of the hypotheses that we think why depression occurs in some people. And there are a lot of hypotheses. When there are a lot of hypotheses, again, means that we really do not know which are the key ones. It is probable that some different people might have a different portion of that hypothesis, and then or a different stage of the disease that different mechanisms play more a majority role. But for today's purpose, we'll focus on the monoamine hypothesis. So the monoamine hypothesis means that you need all 3, serotonin, norepinephrine, and dopamine, to have sufficient amount to maintain the appropriate mood so that you will not get depression. And then if you have a depletion of them, then you have the problem. And so some of the key evidence, I just list 2 here, is that depletion of monoamines by rezapine, and this is an old anti-hypertension drug. People get depression, and that this drug is also known to deplete the monoamines. So that is one key piece of evidence. Another evidence is that all of the antidepressant drugs currently, they are all increased the concentration of brain monoamines, at least in animals. Okay, it's very difficult to do the same study in human. So then, because of that, the idea of monoamine deficiency becomes a predominant mechanism at this point. So the current theory, the conclusion is that favors the notion that a dysregulation of serotonin, norepinephrine, and dopamine would leading to the alteration of their receptors and therefore is related to depression. And as Dr. Cohen had mentioned, that there are also other theories. But I want to point out particularly the neurotrophin hypothesis. One of the neurotrophin is BDNF, is brain-derived neurotrophic factor. And this is involved in maintaining neuronal health, growth, differentiation. And there is some evidence that this protein may be defective and therefore can lead to at least certain types of depression, in certain populations. So there are active research activities trying to work on this mechanism, replenish that. We all know that corticosteroid may be involved because people who are taking corticosteroid, they tend to have an elevated mood. They tend to be happier. And then for those patients, if you take away the corticosteroid, then they would become depressed. So that can also contribute to it. Okay, so this is an oversimplified summary of what serotonin, norepinephrine, and dopamine will do to your brain, to your body. So the take-home message is that you probably need all 3 within a normal range to maintain an appropriate mood and also cognitive function. We also know that in earlier classes that dopamine also is involved in psychosis and Parkinson's disease. So we try not to touch them. So in the earlier days, serotonin and norepinephrine are the key neurotransmitters we want to correct. And hopefully by correcting them, you can already replenish sufficient amount of neurotransmitters to replenish sufficient amount of mood. But some of these newer compounds, bupropion, as Dr. Emmett suggests, is mentioned that it's actually just working on this